Hey guys, as we all know, Warframe has been in a content drought for a couple years now. While we've had bigger open world updates, the frequency of new content to the game has grinded to a crawl. This series will focus on several aspects of Warframe that could be reworked to be more sustainable versions of the modes they are today. This episode, I will focus on Endgame. Now, as DE has admitted, there seems to be a lack of understanding about what constitutes Endgame. And to me, Endgame would mean high risk, high reward content with exclusive items that cannot be earned in any other setting. With the removal of raids, which is the only endgame mode that's really ever existed in Warframe, veterans have no challenging content to play. While sorties attempted to satiate this desire, they lack any real challenge to vets, as almost any frame can clear sortie level content without breaking a sweat. Right now, in Warframe, RBs seem to be the most fitting game mode to be adopted as endgame. Unfortunately, DE recently took out the major risk element of RBs by introducing a revive system. Personally, I think that the decision should be reversed along with a few other alterations to the game mode. The first major change I would make to RBs is to change the stat buff conditions. 300% strength and 300% damage grows old after the 20th run. Instead of this, stats should cycle through strength, duration, efficiency, and range for frames, and attack speed / fire rate, damage, status chance, and critical damage for weapons. This at least would mix up the gameplay and also allow for fun combinations to try, such as 300% fire rate Grakatas or 300% efficiency Ash. The next change would be to revert RB rotations to regular rotations found in the basic game modes, meaning survival would take 5 minutes per rotation. In my opinion, stretching out the rotation makes no sense unless you're trying to inhibit the player from earning rewards. Subsequently, this makes RBs feel much longer than they really are, thus disincentivizing the player from continuing forward. This is antithetical to what endgames should be. To incentivize playing further into the game mode, after a certain point, double rewards should kick in. Perhaps 1 hour makes the most sense since each RB is only available for an hour. After this, rewards should be rolled twice. If people make it even further into the game mode, say 2 or 2.5 hours, triple rolls should come into play. This is because the enemies being faced at this level will be much more punishing than if you were to quit out and rejoin a new arbitration. Without this incentive, 1 hour is the maximum it makes sense to run an RB, as you can just reset the level and get the same rewards, although you would have to go through rotations A and B again. The final change I would make is to either make Bleeding Ephemera or another new ephemera only unlockable after a 2-hour or 3-hour run of arbitrations. One of the key aspects of Endgame is having exclusive content that can only be earned through rigorous challenge. Now, since the Bleeding Ephemera already exists as a purchasable item in the RB store, it would make more sense to have an entirely new ephemera for this. Another alternative would be to have Arbitration's armor set or a Cyandina that is unlocked at 2 or 3 hours. The final change I would make to RBs is a quality of life change. As is, RB drones are a nuisance in the worst possible way. Since they grant invulnerability in tight spaces, which most tiles are, enemies become invulnerable shields for RB drones. Instead of granting invulnerability, RB drones should grant invulnerability to Warframe powers only. This way, if enemies are shielding the drones, players are still able to take out the enemies. While RBs are the most appropriate mode to adjust to endgame, Onslaught was originally pitched by DE as a mode for veteran players. Unfortunately, when released, ESO and Sanctuary Onslaught modes were adjusted for low-level play, and to be honest, I'm fine with newer players having lower-level Endless mode. The problems with Onslaught aren't the levels. That could easily be fixed with an additional version of Onslaught. This would be called Advanced Onslaught, and it would take the current place of ESO's 60 to 70 level starting point. This would free up ESO to be more hardcore, and ideally would start at 90 to level 100. Now, the most glaring issue with ESO is the efficiency gimmick, which practically times you out at wave 8. Instead of a system which gives you the illusion of endlessness, all Onslaught modes should have a set timer to end. Either 20 or 30 minutes would be acceptable. Instead of efficiency, each tile would have a finite amount of enemies in it. To clear a tile, you would have to exterminate all enemies, and that would make the challenge to cycle as many tiles as possible in the given time. I would leave it to DE to determine the enemy count per tile. However, each tile should have more enemies in it than the last. All other gameplay aspects of this mode could stay the same. Another aspect of Onslaught that doesn't make sense is the lack of standing gained. You're doing all this work for Samaras, and yet you gain no standing? It doesn't really make sense, and frankly most people aren't interested in running through levels to scan Samaras targets. Allowing standing to be gained in a similar way to Syndicate sigils would make sense. That is to say that Sanctuary Onslaught gains 11% of affinity towards standing, Advanced Sanctuary Onslaught gets 13%, and Elite Sanctuary Onslaught gets 15%. This provides an alternative to the boring grind of Samaras and opens up Samaras' reward pool to a wider audience. This mode seems to be mostly forgotten by most veteran players, and I don't blame them. To me, playing Nightmare feels nearly identical to regular missions. To reflect this, Nightmare mode should be applied to all nodes. How this would work is once you complete a node, you would unlock the Nightmare setting. This would then allow you to turn up the base level to either 60 or 80. And in addition, a Nightmare modifier would be picked at random upon starting the level. Along with this, players would gain a resource boost greater than the 20% that you get from dark sectors. This would widen the selection of nodes that veterans can have fun with, and thus reward them for doing so. Now, these prior changes beg the question, should Nightmare mods still be granted with every run? To this, there are two solutions I see working. One being, make no changes to how Nightmare mods are gained, as people will not always run Nightmare anyway. And the other is to rename Nightmare as Nightwave, and if you think about it, it's only a 2-letter difference anyway. Instead of granting Nightmare mods, Nightwave missions would grant the current Nightwave cred at 5 credit increments and some Nightwave standing. The Nightmare mods would then be added to the Nightwave pool of rewards. Along with this, the Nightwave boss would have a higher chance of spawning in Nightwave missions, making them more difficult but also more consistent for those hunting the boss. And personally, I prefer this idea. Additionally, DE could add another drop from the Nightwave boss as you'll be fighting them with a Nightmare modifier, making the fight much more difficult than it already was. If you like some of the ideas in this video, please give it a like and share it with your Warframe friends. The only way any of this could get implemented is if DE knows about it. And if you have some ideas of your own friend game, leave a comment below. And stay tuned for the next episode of the Warframe Rework, where I'll address the in-game economy.